Welcome back to another episode of Success Mindset. I am here with my good friend and community advocate partner, all the things, Kira Kimball. So glad to have you on today's episode.
Thanks so much for having me, Tamien.
Yes, I want to dive right in. Well, first of all, for those who don't know you, again, shame on whoever doesn't know who you are, because you're a big deal around here. But share with the folks, kind of a little bit of your background, what you do, and how you are such a huge community advocate and all the work that you do.
Well, I'm the Chief DE&I Officer, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Marsh McLennan Agency across the country here and in Canada.
Ooh, okay.
But in our community, I've been a huge advocate of inviting workplaces to really get committed to creating more equitable and inclusive workplaces for all people.
Yeah, that's really a big deal. Before we dive into the work stuff, because usually I like to get people on the show talking about their personal success, talking about how they view success. I want to get into that, and then we'll get into some of the business things because, again, what you guys are doing and the role that you have is a conversation needed to have, and more people need to understand the depths and the layers of this. But first of all, just for you, like as you think about your journey of success, what were a few key factors of helping you to get to where you are today?
I think continually asking for what I want and believe in. You know, when I talk with folks about leadership and creating their own pathways, that's been something I've had to really say out loud to people who've mentored me, who've had decisions about my career path, is to really communicate what it is I want, because that's going to help me be successful. I mean, when we're doing the things that we enjoy and we're using the skills and behaviors that are fun for us, I mean, for me, that's what really brings me to that success. Patience has been part of the story for me. I mean, I started in higher ed for a decade, then had to find my way through the insurance industry to actually doing the thing that I love within the industry. And it's not something that happens overnight. Success, that S is planted here, then some time, and then it's the U, and you just kind of keep unfolding success. And enjoy it while it's in progress.
Yes. Two words you hit on I want to touch on: patience and belief. First, patience. This has been a big topic for me because, I mean, how many 20-something-year-olds, I know social media has a huge part to play in it, right? They see that, and that person is XYZ, even though how real is it, we don't really know. But it's what they see. It's the reality, right? Their reality is their reality. But there's this essence of, I don't feel successful unless I'm at some fictitious point. And as you talk about patience, I'm not one that just says, just be patient, because I don't think that by itself is great advice, because they should be able to have urgency.
Absolutely.
You should be able to move with urgency. But talk about, from a patient perspective, as you've gone through your 20s and your 30s and those type of things. From my lens, I've heard, that most people don't hit their kind of professional prime, the beginning of their prime, until their 40s.
Yep.
And being 43, I can testify to that. When you said enjoy the journey along the way, but patience along the way, how have you had to grow that in moments of, again, I'm sure you had moments of you wish you were faster, further. How have you engaged with patience to really unfold that and be able to enjoy the journey when you're not where you want to be?
A lot of it is a mindset. I mean, it truthfully is. There have been things along the way that I've wanted quicker, and I've wanted to be able to check that off along my career development journey. And I've just had to recognize either my organization isn't ready for me, either I'm not ready for the next step as a leader in my development. And so really being able to put on that mindset that it's okay to be where I am, and to recognize a career path is about building blocks. It's not about going from 0 to 60. It's all the steps in between that make us who we are. And so, as a person on a career path, thinking about where are those milestones that will help you get to where you want to be has been important for me. Someone that I really value and respected, who breathed some life into my career path, always said to me, thinking about your next step or where you want to be next, start doing those behaviors and start having those mindsets now. That has always been really powerful. And I'm in my 50s, so I've been in this world of work for a long time. But the whole concept of be who you want to be now, practice those behaviors now, that's always provided encouragement for me.
Yeah, we align that. I give people the greatest career advice I had ever gotten was act in the next role,
Yes, yes.
and that hit me. I was in my 30s when I heard it, and it resonated. And my career truly did that. When you just pause and think you should, because people want, I want what you have, but here you have to experience that. You have to learn it. But if you can do the behaviors, that's such huge and sage advice. And so I'm hope folks that really gather that, and it never stops, right?
Right.
Because
It
again, right
doesn't.
now, at 40s, 50s, like there's levels to this stuff.
Yeah. And there's continuous learning that happens. And I guess for me, as I've grown older and hopefully wiser, it's not the end result anymore. That's
Mm-hmm.
so exciting. It's
Mm-hmm.
not the I've got to get to this next step. It is really finding joy in the journey. And if I were
Yes.
talking to my younger Kira in her 20s, who was incredibly achievement oriented, and what's next, it
Mm-hmm.
would be find joy in the journey. Think of career as a joyful pursuit, as a learning pursuit, and not about an outcome. That's something
Yes.
I've really learned for myself.
Yes. I've heard it when I was on my first thinkcation a couple years ago. It was said, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way.
It is truth.
Yeah. And this is one of the things. I have a young gentleman I mentor who's about 24, and he asked me the question a few months back, like, what would you tell a 24-year-old you? And I was like, the 24-year-old you wouldn't listen to anything that I have to say. Do you think, I mean, when you think about that, what you knew then, like what would it have taken for young 20-something Kira to listen to?
Oh my gosh. That's a fair question. That's a really fair question. I think it's probably more the mentors
Mm-hmm.
in my life that I would be more willing to listen to at
Yeah.
that age. And so for younger folks who are thinking about that career path and those aspirations,
Mm-hmm.
definitely seek out a mentor.
Yes.
I mean, it's critical. Ask for that. Ask for what you want from that mentor and really establish that intimate relationship. And I've just found those are the relationships that breathe life into my career development.
Yeah, and the key in there is mentorship, right? It's to have a mentor, you have to be open and willing. You have to acknowledge there's stuff to be learned.
Yeah.
And again, why wouldn't you? Now, it's bad advice for me just from I've never sought out mentors in that way, so that I really had to find it. I say that directly, but books have been my mentors, so
Hmm.
John Maxwell's and all those
Yeah.
type of things. But just being open to that. The second word you had said was belief. This is one that, especially in a day and age where most people's inner dialogue sucks.
Mm.
And people, imposter syndrome's a real thing and all those type of things. Then the people see you and they think, oh my gosh. I think back to when you blazed the stage at CultureCon a couple of years ago, and oh, you're so confident and all those type of things. And I know you're a person that's willing to be open and vulnerable. Like, talk through the journey of that self-talk to say, when it appeared outwardly that I had it all together, what did it take to build belief in the power of possibilities when sometimes that's not the best friend in the world going on internally?
Oh gosh, you are just totally hitting so many buttons over here on the other side of the table. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
everything you're saying is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think self-talk has been really my critical friend. Not critical as in you're not good, but so important
Mm-hmm.
for me to really center my mindset and to recognize that when I'm showing up for myself
Yes.
with opportunity, optimism, that really translates into my actions. So I
Mm-hmm.
know the things that I feed my brain, and what
Mm-hmm.
I say to myself has everything to do with how I look externally. So that is a discipline. And for me, sometimes it means staying off of social media where you get those influences and you get these comparisons. For me, it's not a healthy place to spend a lot of my time. My time is spent more being quiet when I'm preparing for blazing the stage at CultureCon,
Mm-hmm.
being quiet, being by myself, and really talking to myself about what I'm wanting, how I want to show up in the world.
Yes.
And I think our society is so darn busy and there's so many expectations. And I think, our younger generation, the burden that they feel by the pressures out there. I mean, I really think of them and wondering how I would survive in my
Man,
20s. I just know that I really have to, and I would encourage them to take that sacred space of quiet.
talk
And
about it.
quiet is not always comfortable for people, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a discipline, it's a practice. It gets easier as we do it. But for me, that is all about self-talk because I have those doubts too. My confidence isn't always high.
Mm-hmm. Did you always have that? Because I think, and that's the part where, I haven't done the work of really trying to identify it. I could probably guesstimate. For me, it was mid 30s ish when I started having success. I started to get to, the corporate positions, realizing that I was good enough and I did have the goods to do that. So really at 43, so if that didn't happen until in the last 10 years, for sure. Did you always have that, or was there a tipping point? Where would you kind of point that tipping point where it went from more, balanced? It was probably never all negative and there's never all positive, but that tipping point where you at least crossed that 50% threshold or you had more positive. What was that like in your journey of kind of crossing that
Yeah,
threshold?
I think it was probably in my later 30s. And remember, my career path was interrupted for a while from higher ed to the insurance industry. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it was when I started hearing myself having a voice. I had this real self awareness of when I was talking with people or talking with my boss or talking with my team. And I could hear my confidence. I could hear this emergence of, I know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making some good sense here. And again, sometimes it was journaling for me, whether it was typing a note, writing in a journal, however you keep track of that, just to have an idea about how I'm experiencing myself. And I'm pretty
Yes.
darn introspective, so I might be getting a little bit deep here.
Let's do it. You're
But
touching all my words here, so I want to talk
yes,
about
I
it.
mean, just that self-awareness and that introspection, I could really see me starting to step into my own.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm 52, so I've worked through that and my confidence level is a lot higher right now because I feel like I'm in flow. I feel like I'm using all my gifts and talents.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I have influence. I feel like I have credibility. So now I got to use all that for good and for impact, which I certainly hope that I'm doing. But I didn't always feel that way.
Yeah.
But it was an emergence. It wasn't like an arrival. It was
Yep.
a slow emergence and
Mm-hmm.
an awareness. And being able to talk intimately with a peer mentor has been really valuable in my life as well.
Mm-hmm.
And to say, this is how I'm experiencing myself. How am I showing up for you? What are you seeing these same things in me? So getting that feedback from someone who you would count as a peer as opposed to a mentor or a supervisor has been really important in my journey too. And it has encouraged me probably in some instances more than a manager or a mentor has.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things that stand out for me in that. Obviously, in this state where mental health is, oh my God, America, we gotta like face the music. We're
No
not
doubt.
doing good at all. The recent one was 1 out of 4 adults in America are dealing with some level of anxiety, depression. Those are the ones who are admittedly right. Self care is such a big thing, and obviously, it's been a theme of Think 3D since day one. Better you is better for everybody.
Yep.
What does your self-care routine look like? How do you make sure that out of all the demands that you have and the schedules and the things demanding of you and all the stuff, how do you make sure that you are the best you before you engage in the world?
I'll tell you my newest form of self care, giving me permission to say no.
Oh,
That's
yes.
been a new one that I'm trying on because
Mm-hmm.
I know that I have been overloaded and saying yes and feeling this weight of expectation that I think I'm often putting on myself and
Mm-hmm.
that others aren't. So, my new form of self care is being okay with saying no, not going to all the things, not being all the things to everyone. And that takes some discipline because
Mm-hmm.
then you have to decide, where is my time best suited for impact?
Mm-hmm.
But historically, exercise has been a huge thing for me, whether it's walking, riding my bike. I used to power lift. I don't do that anymore, but probably that kind of gets out my yayas, if you will, and my
Mm-hmm.
stress. I listen to music, but I go back to being quiet. I like spending time by myself, and it's not uncomfortable with me, whether it's reading, whether it's just thinking. I think it's critical for us as
Yeah.
human beings to spend time by ourselves, with ourselves is
Yeah.
probably the better way to say it.
For sure, I do. I talk about it when I do executive coaching or some mentoring of. I have a tool I use, Author of My Life, but I would say the real secret of success is found through self-discovery. And where in society do we learn to discover who we really are, right? And in that space, it's only meditation. Meditation is a newer practice for me in the last couple of years. But if you don't learn to quiet your mind out of the 60,000 thoughts you have every day, you have no chance. Like you just stand no chance if it's always cluttered. But you had said something interesting about the peer mentoring and pouring into others, because we've all heard, the rising tides lift all boats. We understand that. It's an easy concept. People get it. The better your friend groups is. But I had this thought just the other day of like, hey, if your inner dialogue was a separate person, how often would you hang out with that person? Really realizing you probably should do some work on that side of you, right? And it's not just expecting it to show up as a version, because if that was that one friend that was like, if you had like a attached twin, you'd want to coach them up if you had to listen to them all the time. There's that side of it, but the other side, as you touched on with peer group, how is your sphere played a part, like in your journey of success? Again, not just the ones that exist as a good people, but maybe some intentionality of lifting up a peer, because if you make that peer better, they're going to in turn make you better. How have you been intentional about developing and crafting your sphere so that it's best for you?
Wow, I love that question. I think I appreciate being around people intimately who share my values.
Mm.
That brings me energy, and that's important for me as opposed
Hmm.
to distracting from that energy. So, finding people who share my values, who care about the things that I care about, those are the folks that I find myself being able to be most vulnerable with, and also the ones who I think pour into me.
Hmm.
I mean, your comment about relationships and how we can lift one another up, I think that is so important, whether it's sharing visibility with them, whether it's creating an opportunity, whether it's saying their name in a boardroom. I mean, it can be a number of different things. I think the more of us who have that mindset, we're going to be lifting up people all the time. And that's what really can change organizations and
Yeah.
communities when we
Yeah.
have that investment in one another. And oftentimes, at least through my journey, Tamien, that has meant giving some of my ego away,
Mm.
and that it's not always about me. And that, in fact, when I make it less about me,
Hmm.
it's that whole thing about all of us rising together. I mean,
Hmm.
that has just been my experience in the last several years. The less I make it about me,
Hmm.
the more collectively successful or impactful I feel with people that I'm in relationship and in community with. And
Yeah.
again, that might be part of wisdom and the journey of
Hmm.
life, but making my ego smaller is not something that was easy
Hmm.
and still is very challenging, but I'm finding it to be more rewarding. Maybe
Yes.
even a form of self care.
Really, I mean, because in the absence of, what kind of expectations are you setting up for yourself? Because naturally, as a human being, this body, right, where it's survival. Like, and again, survival means I have to take care of myself. But I think that's one thing I'm in the process of learning and uncovering. That's almost that secret door or pathway to success is we're all connected. So if we're all really connected, then if I better I make you, I'm making myself better
Yes.
automatically. But it's caring for the other people versus the other way around.
Yeah.
You talked about values, huge, and I think again, not enough people spend time identifying what their values are. So it's almost like that saying, if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything, whatever. Um, what are some of your values? How have you played with those values? How do you hold true to those values in spite of the opportunities? Again, from all the million things going on, we can always divert from them. But how have you gotten aligned with your values? Because I'm sure then in knowing so, you know who you are, which then makes it very easy to say, if this is you, God bless you, you get to do your thing. But this is who I am, and if it's counteracted to that, then I don't want any part of that. How have values been played a part in your journey?
Well, I think it's probably been 13, 14, 15 years ago when I was doing some of this alone time, really thinking about how I wanted to show up as a human being. And I picked three words that I really thought were going to, and still believe, define me and what I think are really important. And that's being joyful. So I really want to bring joy to my work, to my interactions. I want to be encouraging. I want to support, uplift other people, and then I want to be generous. And that doesn't necessarily just mean dollars.
Yep.
It means energy. It means grace, whatever it might mean. Those three things, I always try to align my behaviors and my conversations to make sure that's how I'm showing up.
Yeah.
I've shared with you, I'm a Christian. That faith really guides me and centers me and how I want to show up in the world as well. So that helps me align. But I've always had the grounding belief that everyone's self-esteem is worth maintaining and celebrating. And that's probably been since the 90s, that I just think extending respect and dignity for all people is what I want to be known for.
That's beautiful. I think in that, one of my mantras is live your highest truth. And when you know your highest truth, because again, you can cross-reference that with, I don't care, you can even bring in politics, religion, doesn't matter. Live your highest ideals,
Yes.
whatever your highest truth, if you live that out, 95% of the stuff that we're talking about will go away, but it's the ugly side of when people aren't living their highest truth and those values. And so I think that is such wise thing for anyone to do is get intimate. Who are you really? What are your values? Because you get to have them, and whatever they are, whatever those highest ideals are, if you would just live those out, man, our society would be
I totally agree with you.
so much different. Talking about society, let's hop into some community talk. Obviously, what in the last, I mean, we've been around it long enough to see, and I've only been really probably community focused for the last 5, 10 years. What are you most excited about in this kind of transitionary period of, things happening in our community? Sioux Falls is growing. There's a lot of opportunities, both on the good as well as things we need to work on. But what's got you excited about the success of our community in our city right now?
I think we like to come together to solve problems and that we don't push them off on someone else, some department, some agency. I think there's a huge energy about being a collective, a community for good. And I appreciate those types of efforts and energies. I think the way that we are caring for one another, while it still has a long ways to go, I think that we're thinking differently about it now and
Yeah.
recognizing that there are different communities who might require a different resource, a different way of solving problems or caring for them, as opposed to this is the one way we do it. And I've really appreciated the ability to maybe take off our glasses and try to look at the world through someone else's perspective. I think those types of behaviors are really starting to happen in our community, which my hope is will impact things like affordable housing, childcare, opportunity for all in any industry and any role or position within the world of work, because that's really critical. So I see those good things, but again, that work takes discipline.
Yeah.
My biggest fear is that we'll all of a sudden lose energy for it and it'll take the back burner again, and we won't bring it forward to solve the problems and continue to advance our quality of life. So we've got to have some endurance for this caring for our community and looking at it through a lens of diversity.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you phrased it beautifully that we're now starting to think differently. It's a starting point, or we're not
Yeah.
quite there where we don't see us acting differently in all the ways that we need to, but just that semblance of we're starting to think differently. I think some of the players that are in some of these positions are starting to get away from the way we've always done it and realize, again, we're at a place where from, 40% diversity coming out of our school system, and just we're on that cusp of, now over 200,000 people. Who do we want to become?
Right.
It's a big deal. Magic wand. I give Kira a magic wand, showed it a Cinderella story. Bippity boppity boop, you get to wave it. What's one thing that you would change in this community? Talk about success that would help us move a step closer. What would you change in the community that would help us be better tomorrow going forward?
Judgment.
Okay.
I think, that is a big opportunity. Again, while I see progress, there are a lot of decision makers who can wield a lot of power, whether
Yeah.
it's resourcing opportunities and making assumptions about
Yes.
people because of difference,
Mm-hmm.
where they were born, how they live, what their beliefs are. And that is one of the most limiting behaviors that any of us can levy or put out there in the universe is judgment. Having this
Mm,
belief that someone can't because of who they are, or
yeah.
shouldn't because of how they identify. So that is, something that has inspired the work that I've been doing in the community, and so many others who are doing this work as well, that we
Hmm.
can break the thoughts and the feelings of judgment and create openness and capacity for all people.
Yeah.
And that's where the beauty of community happens, and that's where my
Yeah.
optimism, continues to maintain.
I'd vote for that. I think that's a big one. I remember doing a training with I forget, probably 50 some people in the room, community leaders and those type of things. And I'd asked, raise your hand if you're prejudiced.
Mm.
And there was like one brave older lady. I was like, thank you for being the only honest person in the room. Because prejudice has a dirty connotation to it, but it's like it's prejudge. You can't help how you thought it, because all your life experiences makes you think about a thing in a certain way, or XYZ. Now what you do with that, what the actions behind that, if you allow it to stay, right? And that's part of what I think of this work that you guys are doing, we're trying to do in the community, that there's still a lot of ignorance, a lot of
Mhm.
ignorance. My ideal is the next step, and that is that the next few years we're making it a willful ignorance. That if you're
Yes.
still, I didn't know, that's you. You're choosing that.
Right. It's on
There's,
you.
it's on you. I want to make sure we get into the work that you're doing in your job day to day, because I remember sitting down we were having coffee at Queen City, and you were really unpacking. I was like, unpack, like, what does it mean in your role and your new title, and those type of things. And I was overly impressed by what MMA has done, is doing, the commitment in a world where the vast majority of companies are still checking a box around DE&I, which, I think 3D people always ask us, do you guys do this? And not as a one-off. It's got to be part of the fabric,
Right.
right? Otherwise, it's a cherry on a cake, which isn't part of the cake. You got to bake it in with the ingredients. Maybe share just a little bit first. What the day to day, like, what does that look like in the role that you're doing, and how is it you think that MMA had come to the point of, like, not just saying we need to do this, but I mean, I would really consider it a champion of
Mhm.
this, and the beacon. Unpack that a little bit about your guys' journey, and how you got to where you're at today.
Well, it's about a year since I've been in my role, and about 4 since I started leading the DE&I Council for MMA. And our CEO for the firm across our footprint, he basically said, in order for us to be accountable and to really have the impact we want, we need an executive level position.
Hmm.
So that's really how this came to be, that he wanted to elevate the position to really create the impact. And in terms of my goal and our goal as an organization, it really is simple. We want to create a workplace that is so inclusive and equitable and psychologically safe that
Good word.
everyone feels that they can bring their authentic self to
Yeah.
work, no matter how they identify, that we can really be who we are. We don't have to hide it. We don't have to code switch, that we feel valued. In a nutshell, Tamien, that is it. That's the kind of culture that I'm trying to lead at MMA. And we've got some good feedback. We just did an engagement survey, and our number one word in our word cloud was inclusive.
Mm.
So I think that we are well on our way. My day to day is often advocating for our underrepresented colleagues, whether it's colleagues of color, whether it's women, colleagues with disabilities, the LGBTQ plus community. I could continue that story, but
Hmm.
to advocate for them and to make sure that spaces are created for their voice and for their skills and talents and all levels of our organization. I do a lot around education. I mean, we were just talking about judgment and prejudice. We don't know what we don't know. So I'm trying to create a lot of opportunities along with some amazing volunteers in the firm to help people learn about unconscious bias and how to slow down that thinking, what
Hmm.
allyship looks like, what it really means to be an inclusive leader. So a lot of the foundational work that I've been doing this year is to equip our team with the mindsets and skill sets, because again, there's so many leaders who want to lean in, but they say, I'm nice. I'm a good leader. And when I tell them nice and good have little to do with being an inclusive leader, it piques their curiosity to know
Hmm.
what more is there to do. And the insurance industry, historically we've shown up not very diverse. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the honest truth. So
Hmm.
we are very committed on represented diverse talent strategy. And many of our underrepresented colleagues are involved in helping breathe life into that strategy. Um, However, they want to participate in their regions. So we're just getting disciplined now to thinking differently who our talent is and to
Yeah.
make sure that we're casting the net wider and being really inclusive for representation. So that's probably our next level, if you will. We've done some really good stuff on education, and now we're really trying to open the pathways so folks will think of themselves in the
Hmm.
insurance industry and that we are creating equity for all colleagues, not just some who've identified with the majority or the in group, if you will,
Yeah.
but really disrupting those policies and those practices to ensure a fair playing field for everybody.
It's a big deal. I think in the work that I've experienced in that, right, where people won't say they won't admit to checking the box, but it's a reality of what most organizations have done. And I mean, one thing I heard in there is a key difference is you have to have true buy-in from the top,
You
right?
do.
Against, I think a lot of them where like how they measure that is what's our diverse hiring pool and blah blah blah, all these various things. It's very surface level versus genuinely seeing the impact and the why for the right thing to do, but as an organization, like going forward in the 21st century, if you want to have not even a competitive advantage, but really should be if you want to be competitive, our dynamic of our country is
Yeah.
changing, and so getting ahead of that is a big deal. As you think about, so let's say there's somebody out there, they're not the CEO, they're not in that top position. What advice would you have to say, like, I want to help move this work forward where I'm at? I don't have the power position necessarily. Where do I start? Where do I start helping to move this forward? Because you can't just wait for the CEOs all to get it,
Right, right,
right?
right.
What can be done? What advice would you give in that space to that person?
For the individual contributor who wants to get something started, maybe
Hmm.
it's developing a colleague resource group, maybe it's bringing in someone to do training, thinking differently about charitable giving, whatever it might be.
Hmm.
Find some like minded folks who are thinking with you on these same lines so you can lock arms together
Hmm.
and then find a leadership person who can be your ally. If it can't be the CEO, it's a middle manager who might be able to open that door to the CEO
Hmm.
and share your thinking with them about your ideas. So, having some idea about what you want to do or baking a plan before you go to the CEO can be really helpful, as opposed to just having a philosophical conversation. Talk about, we want to start a DE&I council.
Hmm.
We want to bring pathways in to do some allyship training, whatever that might be, or we want to learn about some of the small business owners who are women or part of the BIPOC community, whatever that is.
Hmm.
So find your group who might join you in this effort, so they have some energy. Find a middle manager who can open that door, and then just do some truth telling. That's been the biggest thing that's worked within my organization, where we've got 14 regions, 14 CEOs, and a grand CEO, if you will. Having empowered colleagues go and speak with them about funding their DE&I council, funding their colleague resource group. That's where things are turning now, where it's
Yeah.
not just the one CEO, it's all of the leadership across the footprint now resourcing these 170 plus volunteers we have.
Yeah. I love that, the words obviously advocate and ally and those various things, but the word empowerment. I think so oftentimes what I see is people, again, that they wait for the title, the position. I can't, and there's always something you can't. You can't do everything, but you can do something. And the word I love about the word empowerment is you have the authority. You have the authority, regardless of position, regardless of what you do in the community, to do something, right? And if people just grab the on to they have the authority to start somewhere. I think a lot of it is, are they willing to do the hard work? Because again, I'm I'm sure you could testify
Yes.
This hasn't been an easy road.
No.
But one thing I appreciate about you the most is, again, you're the passion behind it, because, I mean, again, what you guys have done with Pathways, obviously you and a bunch of other folks, but just being beacons of possibilities, which, I think about just where Sioux Falls be without the work that some of us are standing up to do.
Right.
It's important stuff. Success overall. One thing I think about, my challenge with the way we've talked about diversity historically has been, we start with differences. And when you start with differences, you start with separation. Whereas we have way more in common
Mm-hmm.
than we are different, right? Along your journey, what's maybe a story or a moment where you found commonality, you find something that pleasantly surprised you around the space as you've advocated for the work and moved forward? What's something in that commonality of human beings and the human condition have you found along your journey that this is such important work that keeps you going?
I think that has been the answer. Having conversations with people one-on-one. When I started in 2019 with those 100+ conversations in the community around DE&I, when I would go meet with someone who maybe I was a different race than I, a different sexual orientation than I, whatever it was, I always found after I ended that conversation that there were lots of things we had in common.
Mm.
And, that's the beauty of it. And when I do a lot of education around this, especially around stereotyping and unconscious bias, instead of putting every person in a community or a group together, talk with someone individually, get to know that colleague on your team, that business partner that you work with in another company, whatever that is, because there's so much truth.
Yep.
And the other piece of it is, it's really cool to learn about someone who's different than
Yes.
you are. It's so eye-opening
Yes.
and just interesting that we can share these things about ourselves so intimately.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a motivator too, is while I found similarities, I'm also learning something and
Yeah.
growing as a person.
Yeah. Two birds, one stone. That's a good one. What does success mean to you?
Success means having joy in the work that I'm doing. There have been times in my career where I've just been checking a box to go to work and getting a paycheck. And no matter what that paycheck was, if I wasn't having joy in it, I'm not going to define myself as successful. We all have different career values. There's no question about that. But having joy and having the opportunity to live in my values in the world of work, if you will, gives me this feeling that I'm going to make the impact that I want to make. And that's also valuable too. So joy and living into my values at work would be the two biggest things
Love
that
it.
help me feel successful.
Love it. Well, last question. We always do our cube conversation card, so I'll grab a random and we'll get to hear your
All
answer response.
right.
What do we got here? What was one of the happiest days of your life?
Oh my gosh. That is a really hard one. I can't think of one particular happy day, but I will say my 21st birthday was really outstanding. I was in Moorhead, Minnesota at the time. My sister was 19. My parents, they came up to Moorhead. They surprised me and they had 21 little gifts. And they weren't like big gifts.
Yeah.
They were like, what are things that Kira would be happy about and excited and would feel loved? And that was a stellar day because they took the time to make me feel really special. And, we're really intentional with doing just that. So that, that stands out as a really amazing day of feeling loved.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson in all that for us of, we always say nothing of significance happens without intention. And that was a significant moment because of the intention. And all of us have the opportunity. You can't do that every day, but you can make someone feel valued. You can make someone feel cared about, just the smallest of things. And the more of us do that, we're helping to feed and fuel successful organizations, which feeds and fuels successful community and ultimately successful lives. So I appreciate you so much, my friend, joining. Great conversation and so much value to add to the world out there. And so I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Tamien.
And we'll see you guys next time on the next episode.